January 30th, 2026. Washington, D.C. is gripped by a damp, biting cold, the kind that seems to seep through the marble walls of the Department of Justice. Inside, the atmosphere is clinical, detached, yet humming with the electric tension of a long-awaited deadline. For months, a team of 500 attorneys and federal reviewers has been sequestered in windowless rooms, their eyes strained by the harsh glow of monitors. They are the gatekeepers of 3 million pages, a digital mountain of evidence unearthed by the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The release isn't a sudden explosion, it is a controlled leak, a massive data dump designed to satisfy the letter of the law while perhaps obscuring its spirit. As the files begin to populate the DOJ's public portal at 10 a.m., the world watches a progress bar that represents decades of secrets. And this is not just a collection of documents, it is a ledger of a shadow world, a directory of high society appetites, and the systematic exploitation of the vulnerable. Among the first batches to be indexed are the internal communications from the Southern District of New York. The language is dry, legal jargon stripped of emotion, yet the details are jarring. Reviewers note the mundane logistics of a predator's life, receipts for private jet fuel, catering invoices for parties on a private island, and the constant rhythmic flow of wire transfers. There is a specific focus on the year 2007, a time when the FBI believed an indictment was imminent. The notes describe a student at Royal Palm Beach High School receiving flowers delivered by Epstein's staff. It's a small detail, a fleeting moment of faux chivalry that masks a much darker intent. But as the public begins to dig, the first major contradiction surfaces. The Department of Justice, led by Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, insists on transparency. Yet the screens are filled with black bars. Thousands of redactions cover names, addresses, and entire paragraphs of testimony. The official reason is the protection of victims, a noble shield used to justify the fog. But for the survivors watching from the sidelines, the silence feels like a second betrayal. They see their own trauma being managed, curated, and in some cases partially exposed, while the men who sat in those leather-bound chairs on the Lolita Express remain protected by the very ink meant to serve justice. By mid-afternoon, the servers are struggling under the weight of a global audience. Journalists in London, New York, and Moscow are cross-referencing names against old flight logs. The tension moves from the legal to the political. A series of emails from late 2019, shortly before Epstein's death, surfaces in the cache. They aren't from Epstein himself, but from individuals within his orbit, discussing contingency plans and reputation management. The tone is one of mild inconvenience rather than moral panic. In a quiet corner of the digital archive, a folder labeled Correspondence, 2020 Election Cycle appears. It contains raw, unverified tips sent to the FBI in the heat of a presidential campaign. Among them are sensationalist claims involving the highest office in the land. The DOJ takes the unusual step of issuing a simultaneous press release, and preemptively labeling these specific documents as false and unfounded. It is a move intended to de-escalate, yet it achieves the opposite. It signals that even in a dump of 3 million pages, the government is still deciding which truths are fit for public consumption. The narrative shifts toward a specific set of flight records from the 1990s. The name Donald Trump appears not as a target of an investigation, but as a frequent entry in the logs of Epstein's private planes. The documents don't show a crime, they show a proximity. They show a man moving within a circle where the lines between business, pleasure, and something far more sinister were intentionally blurred. Trump's team is quick to respond, claiming the files exonerate him by showing a lack of deep involvement, but the mere presence of the entries late in the 2026 political cycle creates a tremor that no press release can settle. As the sun sets over the Potomac, the focus turns to the international implications. A batch of records from the Florida investigation into a former butler reveals a hidden ledger. This isn't a digital file, has but a scanned image of a handwritten notebook. It contains initials and dates, many of them corresponding to visits from foreign dignitaries. The handwriting is cramped, hurried. One entry, dated June 2010, mentions a special guest from the United Kingdom, accompanied by a request for young, trustworthy staff. The political rift in Washington widens by the hour. Democrats point to the redactions as proof of a cover-up. Republicans point to the lack of new charges as proof of a witch hunt. Both sides are looking for a weapon in the paper trail, but the documents themselves remain stubbornly neutral, a cold record of a system that functioned exactly as it was designed to, protecting those with the means to stay above the fray. While the air in Washington remains thick with disputes over the heavy redactions across the Atlantic, the tremors of the Epstein files have begun to shake the most ancient of foundations. In London, the biting February drizzle does not deter the crowds gathering outside Buckingham Palace. The focus is no longer on royal ceremony, but on a declassified data set marked UK-EXT-2010. These files contain exactly what British authorities have long feared: the intersection of dynastic power and the raw, unvarnished corners of desire. A series of emails from the summer of 2010 flickers onto the screens of investigators. In them, Jeffrey Epstein does not use complex codes. He writes with a confidence that borders on arrogance. Then he offers to arrange an intimate dinner for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man previously known to the world by his princely title. "I have a friend who I think you might enjoy having dinner with," Epstein wrote on a June afternoon. The reply from Andrew's personal email address was brief. "I would be delighted to see her. Signed, A." This detail is not new in terms of allegations, but it is new in the rhythm of the truth. The woman mentioned was a 26-year-old Russian citizen, described by Epstein as clever, beautiful, and trustworthy. To the British public, trustworthy carries a bitter taste. It is not about trust between friends, but a commitment to silence within a system designed never to leak. Not far away, at 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces unprecedented pressure. Members of Parliament from both sides have abandoned the usual diplomatic script. They demand that Andrew testify before the U.S. Congress. It is a request that shatters all rules of sovereignty and royal privilege. But in the era of the 2026 Transparency Act, those privileges seem to be melting under the heat of 180,000 newly published photographs. Every 800 words in the new dossier, a legal contradiction emerges. Lawyers in London argue that extraditing or compelling a royal family member to testify for a closed case in the U.S. is unprecedented and unconstitutional. However, a mundane detail in the FBI's investigative files shifted the balance. A receipt from a luxury hotel in London, and where Epstein paid for a series of therapy services during the same period Andrew appeared in the emails. These services were not performed by professionals, but by young girls who had just arrived in the UK on short-term tourist visas. The silence from the palace in these days no longer carries an air of majesty, but the look of paralysis. In the suburbs, people have begun to talk about the shadow over the monarchy. Royal historian Robert Lacey noted that the Epstein case is no longer a personal scandal. It is a test of the survival of an institution in the eyes of the international public. The public does not demand written apologies. They demand Andrew's presence before justice, something he has avoided for years with the reasoning that he saw no suspicious behavior from his billionaire friend. And the conflict intensified when a new witness appeared in the declassified documents in New York. A former security guard at Epstein's Florida estate testified to seeing Andrew not just once, and those interactions were far from mere social calls. Details about cleaning up after massage sessions, the arranging of $100 bills on bedside tables, and the presence of a gun under the mattress all created a context in which no person of sound mind could claim to have seen nothing suspicious. Uncontrolled consequences began to spread to the London business world. Charitable funds linked to the royals began to see donors withdraw. The fallout did not stop with those directly named in the files, but haunted anyone who had ever stood in the same frame. An undated photo, restored from one of Epstein's damaged hard drives, shows Andrew in a state of excessive relaxation next to a young woman with a terrified face. That image, more than any line of email, became a wordless indictment. As night falls over the Thames, newspapers prepare morning editions with headlines about cross-border justice. But inside the corridors of power at Westminster, it is understood that this is only the tip of the iceberg. Documents regarding the cooperation between international intelligence agencies in tracking Epstein remain classified as national security and are completely blacked out. While London reeled from the royal connections, the wave of data from the U.S. Department of Justice began to wash into the heart of Silicon Valley and the gated mansions of Seattle. This is where numbers represent not just currency, but algorithmic power and global influence. Among the 3.5 million pages of documents is a folder labeled Digital Circle, Tech Industry Connections, revealing a web of relationships woven during 2012 to 2013, the period when Jeffrey Epstein was working to rebuild his image following his Florida conviction. Declassified records show a chain of emails between Epstein and close associates of top tech billionaires. Most notable are messages seemingly linked to Elon Musk. Documents indicate that during this period there were discussions about coordinating a trip to Epstein's private island, and accompanied by questions about the best party ever. Although Musk has spoken out on X, asserting these emails were misunderstood and that he declined many invitations, their presence in the FBI archives creates a difficult contradiction between public statements and what was recorded in the shadows of federal investigations. Similarly, Bill Gates, a name that appeared in previous leaks, continues to be mentioned with new details about meetings after Epstein's release from prison. Newly released emails show Epstein's persistence in trying to draw Gates into multilateral charitable projects, a way for Epstein to use the reputation of those untaintable as a shield for himself. Every 600 words, the reader encounters a detail showing the normalization of crime within the elite. A transcript from an interview with Epstein's former butler shows how wealth shielded all wrongdoing. At the New York mansion, staff were ordered to distribute stacks of $100 bills in strategic locations, ready for Epstein to pay for services instantly. These everyday details, from cleaning up used condoms to placing guns under mattresses, were reported to FBI agents as early as 2007, but were buried in decade-long legal maneuvers. The greatest contradiction lies in the role of Alexander Acosta, the former U.S. attorney in Miami and later Labor Secretary under Donald Trump. The newly declassified documents include a detailed draft indictment from May 2007 on where junior prosecutors had prepared full evidence to charge Epstein and 3 personal assistants with sex trafficking of minors. However, this indictment was never signed. Instead, a secret non-prosecution agreement was executed, allowing Epstein to plead to a minor state-level prostitution charge. The uncontrolled consequence of this cover-up was an ecosystem of silence that lasted another 12 years, allowing Epstein to continue reaching new victims and solidifying ties with politicians like Bill Clinton or Donald Trump. Records show Trump's name appears thousands of times, including emails where Epstein and his associates shared articles about him or gossiped about his family. Meanwhile, Bill Clinton appears in many photos and emails from the early 2000s, though his spokesperson maintains the relationship ended long before the crimes were exposed. Power in the Epstein files lies not just in the commission of the act, but in the ability to turn evidence into chalk dust. A secret memo from the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General mentions the loss of several key computer hard drives at the Manhattan townhouse immediately after Epstein's 2019 arrest. The safe in the basement, rumored to contain secrets that could topple many careers, was empty when police arrived. The release of the final batch of files in 2026 did not bring the explosion of arrests the public expected. Instead, it left a lingering tremor regarding the helplessness of the justice system against the fortress of power and money. In the heart of Washington, congressional debates over the redactions shifted toward accusations of a half-hearted transparency, where the identities of survivors were sometimes cruelly exposed, while the true enablers remained hidden behind thick lines of black ink. The greatest uncontrolled consequence of this case is the erosion of trust. While the political and business elite are busy defending themselves in the media, the true victims face re-traumatization as the most painful details of their lives become tools for political infighting. The death of Virginia Giuffre in 2025, a woman who spent her life confronting royalty and wealth, became a grim symbol of the cost of speaking the truth in a world where justice often arrives too late, or not at all. 10. Every 800 words in the sociological analysis reports following the disclosure, an alarming shift is noted. Awareness of human trafficking and child abuse in the U.S. soared by 15%. But with it came the rise of extremist conspiracy theories. The public, finding no satisfactory answers in the 3 million pages, began seeking justice through algorithms and anonymous forums. The backup servers in Latvia, or the empty safes in Manhattan, were no longer investigative details. They became pieces of a permanent skepticism about how the world truly operates. The final contradiction lies in the existence of names like Donald Trump, in Bill Clinton, or Andrew in the files without any new criminal charges from the DOJ. This legal purity contradicts the evidence of intimacy and night flights absent from official records. For investigators like Todd Blanche, enforcing the Transparency Act was a task completed, but for American society it was a wound just torn open with no cure. Jeffrey Epstein's life ended in a jail cell in 2019, and Ghislaine Maxwell is serving 20 years, but the empire of silence they painstakingly built seems to still have a life of its own. Legal reforms like the 2025 EFTA Act opened the archive doors. But perhaps they also showed that the most naked truth sometimes lies in what cannot be written down, or what was destroyed before the police's flashbulbs could go off.